This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. As we go to the streets of New York last night, thousands of people shut down the West Side Highway, went to Times Square, traveled throughout the boroughs, some scores of people, then hundreds of people and thousands. Renee Feltz was in Times Square.
I'm Bob Bailey from Brooklyn, New York. Oh, I'm out here actually working, but I have a lunch break, so I took my lunch break time to protest.
And what went through your mind when you heard the grand jury's decision not to indict the officer responsible for Eric Garner's death?
It's like they keep on making excuses for the officers. They're not being liable for their actions, and that's horrible.
The blue wall has to be broken.
My name is Kay Gaines. I represent Brooklyn, the island called New York City.
And I heard you say the blue wall has to be broken, yelling to the police officers. Explain why you're here and what you're saying to them.
The blue wall has to be broken. A lot of the officers that was part of the Eric Garner situation, I mix up Mike Brown and Eric Garner because they're one and the same. It has to be broken. You can see that the cops didn't want to be a part of that. It was a couple of cops that are actually the ones who were supposed to be prosecuted that did not get into trouble. So what's happening is we're not getting justice. And they know we're not getting justice. They don't want to be out here, but they have to because this is how they feed their families. But they also have families and children that's going to go through the same thing if they don't do something about it.
Hi, my name is Rodrice Vincent. I'm a Brooklyn native, but I live in the Bronx. I'm out here tonight because I'm a mother of 3 children, 2 of them which are black boys. I fear for the lives of my sons. My daughter, my youngest, is 6 years old. When she looks at a police officer, she's afraid. She's not looking at them as somebody who's there to protect and serve her. And at such a young age, so innocent, for even her to be aware that police hurt people that look like her dad, that look like her brother, that look like her uncle, and they don't have to be doing anything.
I'm Zakia Ali, and I'm here because I don't have nowhere else that I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be here in solidarity with the people. I'm a teacher. I teach my students to be obedient. I teach my students to think. I teach my students to be critical, but most of all, I teach them to be human beings. But obviously, I feel like a hypocrite because what I'm teaching my students is not reciprocated. And one of these days, my school, which is predominantly African American, several of my students are walking down the street and they could be the next Eric Garner, they could be the next Tamir Rice, they could be the next Michael Brown. But what we see right now is an indictment on black skin. No indictment on the cops, but an indictment on black skin and an indictment on people that they feel is less than.
Some of the voices of people protesting in the streets, that was Times Square. Among those who were in Times Square was Spike Lee and his son. Vincent Warren is with us right now, Executive Director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. Vince, yesterday the Staten Island grand jury cleared Daniel Pantaleo, the officer who actually put Eric Garner in that chokehold. Your response?
As a lawyer, I was absolutely shocked by this because really when you have video evidence like that, the evidence that we all saw, that tells more than half of the story. What I think really ended up happening was that the prosecutor, very much like Ferguson, I understand, presented all of the evidence to the grand jury. It was essentially a failing to secure an indictment. It's the prosecutor's responsibility to get an indictment, and when the prosecutors start shifting the blame and people start thinking, oh, it was the grand jury that didn't indict the police officer, that's when we know that we have a problem. It's a systemic problem where the prosecutors are not taking responsibility for what their jobs are.
Well, could you explain what a grand jury is, when it's called, and what the failures of that system are? Because we saw the same thing in Ferguson just 2 weeks ago.
Sure. Grand juries are it's an old process that actually came from England, and very often prosecutors will convene a secret group of jurors to hear information and evidence in order to determine whether charges can be brought against the person that they're seeking to charge. And so in both of these cases, the prosecutors convened these grand juries. But what was different about these grand juries than most is that the prosecutors laid out all of the evidence and essentially asked the grand jury to figure it out. Everybody knows that you can indict a ham sandwich if you do it right. There are hundreds of thousands of black, Latino men that get indicted every single day, and a lot of them for nothing. So it's really shocking that we have a police officer with this videotape when all you really have to do is to show the tape, hand out the popcorn and say to the grand jury, well, how do you vote? That's how you secure an indictment on this case. You don't have a big, broad conversation about what the police officer was feeling at the time.
How rare is it not to secure an indictment?
It is exceedingly rare. You know, in federal grand juries, in 2010, there were 160,000 grand jury presentations, and only 11 of them ended up with non-indictments. And it is
11 of 160,000.
Exactly. And it is even more rare to get an indictment when it has to do with a police officer. And that's what the issue is here. It's the fact that there are cops that are in the dock that changes everything for the prosecutors.
Well, what role do district attorneys play in the way in which a grand jury unfolds? A number of people have pointed out that Staten Island District Attorney Daniel Donovan was considered pro-police.
It's hard to be a district attorney in America and not be pro-police for the following reason. Your entire job description depends on cooperation with the police department. Police officers present evidence, they preserve evidence, they collect evidence, and they give witness testimony in virtually every criminal trial in America. And then now we're trying to pretend that these same prosecutors and police officers that work together every single day should be on opposite sides of the V, and that they'll both be acting in independent ways. It simply doesn't happen.
So when a police officer kills someone, should there automatically be a special prosecutor?
Absolutely, and I wouldn't even limit it to killing. I think that in any opportunity for the district attorney to prefer any criminal charges against a police officer, that there should automatically be an independent prosecutor to avoid what we all know is a conflict of interest between the prosecutor's office and the police department.
Well, on Wednesday, Attorney General Eric Holder said the Justice Department was launching a federal civil rights investigation into the death of Eric Garner. He also stressed that all lives must be protected equally.
Now, we've all seen the video of Mr. Garner's arrest. His death, of course, was a tragedy. All lives must be valued. All lives. Mr. Garner's death is one of several recent incidents across our great country that have tested the sense of trust that must exist between law enforcement and the communities they are charged to serve and to protect. This is not a New York issue, nor a Ferguson issue alone. Those who have protested peacefully across our great country following the grand jury's decision in Ferguson have made that very clear.
That was Attorney General Eric Holder. So, Vince Warren, could you talk about how you feel the Department of Justice has responded to this case and what you feel ought to be done?
Yes, and just let me give a little bit of real talk to the Attorney General on this. The issue is not whether all lives matter. Of course, all lives do. The fact is that black lives don't matter in the criminal justice system. So it would be extraordinary to have our first black Attorney General to be able to be a little bit more nuanced in the analysis. But moving forward from that, I'm very happy that he's announced an investigation. I would point out that he's also announced investigations in Trayvon Martin. He's also announced investigations in Ferguson with Mike Brown. These investigations tend to go under the radar screen for a very long period of time. And then what I'm concerned about is at the end of this, we'll come up with, well, we tried to look at things and we didn't have any information. But the Attorney General and the President can do more than this. The DOJ, the Department of Justice, can defund police departments that do discriminatory practices, and they can defund and provide incentives for good police practices around the country, and I'd like to see that as well.
I wanted to go to the one person who was arrested after Eric Garner died. While Daniel Pantaleo will not face charges for choking Eric Garner, a Staten Island grand jury did indict a man who filmed the entire incident. In August, a grand jury indicted Ramsey Orta on weapons charges stemming from an arrest by undercover officers. Ramsey Orta spoke to Time magazine about what he's been through since he filmed the fatal encounter.
I've been harassed by cops since it's happened. Anything, like, just don't interact physically, just pull out a camera, and that's all people need. Not only New York is getting abused by police, it's everywhere. I just hope it gives people the courage to not be scared of these people, because it's a lot of he say, she say. But once you have proof, nothing could go against that.
So that's Ramsey Orta, this young man. And when I went to the protest, straight from Ferguson to Staten Island, when 1,000 people marched, I saw Ramsey and his wife, Chrissy Ortiz. They were standing right on the stoop where Ramsey filmed. We were right next to that beauty salon where Eric Garner was taken down. I asked to talk to them. They were too afraid. It was not only Ramsey who was arrested the day after the city medical examiner declared Eric Garner's death a homicide, but then his wife, Chrissy Ortiz, was also arrested.
This is how the power structure works. I mean, it's almost too perfect of an example where the police officer that chokes a man to death doesn't get indicted. The man that films the police officer choking the man to death gets indicted, and his entire family is pressurized. This is not random happenstance, and this is actually the orderly working of our criminal justice system, where police officers have so much power and control that they can put pressure on witnesses, that they can make people's lives miserable until they get the result that they want. But the result that we want as a society is one in which where we see these types of horrible police practices, whether happening on videotape or not, where we can feel confident that there will be accountability for police officers. And I don't think anybody in America feels that there can be accountability for a police officer for killing an unarmed black man at this moment in America.
Well, on Wednesday, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio said he and his wife, Charlene, fear for the safety of their teenage son, Dante.
Charlene and I have had to talk to Dante for years about the dangers that he may face. Good young man, law-abiding young man who never would think to do anything wrong, and yet, because of a history that still hangs over us, the dangers he may face, we've had to literally train him, as families have all over this city for decades, in how to take special care in any encounter he has with the police officers who are there to protect him. And that painful sense of contradiction that our young people see first, that our police are here to protect us, and we honor that. And at the same time, there's a history we have to overcome, because for so many of our young people, there's a fear. And for so many of our families, there's a fear.
That was New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio speaking yesterday. Bill de Blasio is married to an African-American, so his children are also African-American. Vince, could you talk about what you think the city's response has been to this decision, and in particular what the mayor had to say? I'm
very appreciative that the mayor is not only talking from a policy perspective and also from a personal perspective. I also have two teenagers at home, black teenagers at home, and I deal with the same question as my parents dealt with me. But this is actually a time where the mayor can put his money where his mouth is. There are real opportunities for change here, and the number one thing that he has to do is he has to talk to his police commissioner and get rid of this horrible broken windows policing policy that led to the deaths of Eric Garner.
What that is? What is the broken window policy?
Sure. Broken windows is a policy that's been brought in by Bill Bratton. It's been around for a very long time, precursor to stop and frisk, which the Center for Constitutional Rights just recently got struck down. But it goes after low-level incidents and crimes and gets the police department in the position of giving tickets for people that don't walk their dogs with a leash or walk through the parks, and that these are the theory is that by cracking down on those types of incidents that they get to the bigger fish. The reality is by cracking down on those types of things, they end up spending time and resources pushing forward prosecutions of relatively innocent black and Latino people in poor neighborhoods. It's a problem that has to go. The second thing that has to happen is that we have a joint reform process in the stop and frisk case where the police department, the police union, and other activists and community members are going to come to the table. And this is the point where the community gets to say, we want to talk about how we are being policed. That's the solution that we're all looking for. It's not commissions and it's not conversations. It's getting the people that are affected in the communities at the table and to lay out the real deal for how the problem is, and then to come to solutions from that.
Last night, I went up to the National Action Network headquarters up on 145th Street. Reverend Al Sharpton held a news conference with Gwen Carr, Eric Garner's mother, as well as Esau Garner, his wife, to respond to the Staten Island decision. And afterwards, I saw Carlton Berkeley. He's a retired police detective here in New York, longtime member of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. And I asked him afterwards if he could talk about what exactly Pantaleo did. So he pulled out the NYPD patrol guide for officers and read the restrictions the guide outlines on the use of chokeholds.
And it states here in the patrol guide, procedure 203-11, the use of force. And it states, members of the New York City Police Department will not use chokeholds. A chokehold shall include, but is not limited to, any pressure to the throat or windpipe, which may prevent or hinder breathing or induce the intake of air. That is exactly what happened in the Eric Garner case.
So that's Carlton Berkeley, retired NYPD detective. He said other officers on the site should also be held accountable for Eric Garner's death, not just Officer Pantaleo, who used the chokehold. Here, Detective Berkeley reads again from the NYPD patrol guide.
At the scene of a police incident, many members of the service may be present, and some members may not be directly involved in taking police action. However, this does not relieve any member present of the obligation to ensure that the requirements of the law and department regulations are complied with. Members of the service are required to maintain control or intervene if the use of force against a subject clearly becomes excessive. Failure to do so may result in both criminal and civil liability. Excessive force will not be tolerated. So therefore, with what I just read you, technically those other officers should be held accountable. Because with this man saying 11 times, I can't breathe, when was any of the others going to say, hey, get off him, he can't breathe?
Again, that's Carlton Berkeley, retired New York police detective, talking about two issues. One is the one that apparently in the grand jury, and we've yet to see the notes of the grand jury, Pantaleo actually said he did what he was taught in the academy. He was actually wrestling, using a wrestling move, not a chokehold, which is illegal in the police guide. And the second point is this issue of everyone else who was there. All the other officers, look at how they held him down. If a group of us attacked someone here, we would all be held accountable.
Absolutely. And this highlights, there are two things that are highlighted. I think number one is that there tends to be a focus on the one police officer, and people want to talk about particular techniques that they use, and that's part of the problem, but that's not the whole problem. We have what we know as the blue wall of silence, and everybody knows, real talk, everybody knows that police protect their own. Everybody knows that police officers will lie to protect their own. Everybody knows that the goal of policing is to not get caught doing a criminal act. And so we have a situation where I agree, every single one of those police officers who were there that failed to stop it, the people that failed to report it, the people that said that it wasn't something that we all know that it is, should face charges just like any of us would if we were in that same situation. There are two rules in America. There's rules for police and there are rules for the rest of us. And that's the problem that this particular criminal justice system is failing to solve, and that's why people are out on the streets, because we need something new. It's not working.
Well, could you also talk, Vince, about the question of proportionality? Because one of the things that was very striking last night, and also 2 weeks ago when the Ferguson protests happened, is that there's such an enormous and what appears to be massively excessive police presence for, you know, peaceful demonstrations, vans upon vans of police officers. What is the relationship between two things? First, the number and, I mean, what appear to be too many police officers for a peaceful demonstration, and second, the military gear that appears more and more frequently in public spaces used by the police.
Yes, the two issues. Number one is that the police always over-police protests, and people confuse unrest and disease, meaning dis-ease. upending the status quo that's not working, and they confuse that with violence, they confuse that with looting. So the police department aren't looking at protesters when they go to these things, they're looking at potential terrorists. This is post 9/11 America. Let's not pretend that they don't think this way. They do. So they over-police these situations, and which brings us to the next situation, which is that people are angry and frustrated, and so when the police react that way and then come with this militarized gears and they're shooting beanbags and rubber bullets, and they're in Ferguson as they were doing, and even when they're here and they're cordoning off protesters and trapping them as they have here in New York over decades of protest, and then saying, okay, now you have to disperse, but people can't disperse, and they arrest everybody. These are tactics that the police use not just for social control, but this is also social justice control, and that's the problem that we have.
I want to go to two questions. It has been now debated for throughout the night in the media. Was it an illegal police chokehold? Yes, it was a violation of the patrol guide, but was it illegal? Now, in New York, a 2010 law was passed. It was actually dealing with domestic violence, about strangulation. It's second-degree strangulation, choking to the point of injury, impairment, stupor, or unconsciousness can leave ambiguous marks or no marks at all. And I guess it was passed to deal with this issue. Why isn't this illegal, even if the officer says in the grand jury, oh, I thought I was doing something else?
I haven't read that statute, and that may apply to police officers, or it may not, but let's assume that it does apply to everybody, as most laws do. Of course, the police officer can be charged with that. There's no reason why they can't be, and at some level, it doesn't matter whether he says I was doing what I was told, or I was doing what I was taught, or it really wasn't a chokehold. It was a wrestling move that crushed the windpipe. It ends up with the same thing. This is an aggressive action, homicide that killed a man. And so, but the law and the prosecutor should be good enough to be able to find what areas of law it violates and indict them for that.
Are these grand juries being used as substitute trials? But in both cases in Ferguson and New York, only one side is presented because it is a grand jury. It's just supposed to be about an indictment. So you don't have a cross-examination of the police officer. In both cases, you know, when a police officer comes before a grand jury, they are humanized. So you get just their side of the story. And because it's not a trial, could they be indicted if it's found something was wrong with this grand jury? Like in Ferguson, the question of the law the grand jury members were presented with, was it wrong?
So the answer to the first question that we're seeing in these types of police cases is that the prosecutors are treating this more like sort of a Wikipedia roll your own kind of trial where all of the evidence is there. That's not how they're typically done. Usually that they're presenting a concise set of information that is designed to lead to an indictment.
Right, they're acting as the defense attorney rather than the prosecutor, right. And then you don't have the other side.
Exactly. And to be clear, defendants or potential defendants have a right to testify in the grand jury. I myself have put plenty of people in the grand jury in Brooklyn. But the difference is when I put my clients in the grand jury, they say their piece, there are a couple of questions, and they're out. And then the prosecutor then has the rest of the time to clean that up. And what I think has happened here, where I hear that there were a couple of hours of this police officer testifying, that the prosecutor basically built in the defense case. I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to do this, here's what was going on, I was trained. None of that has any relevance in a grand jury proceeding when those issues are normally brought out at trial. That's what the big problem is that this is turning into a let's give the cop a break type of event when it really should be let's seriously look at what the charges and the information suggests.
Could they be recharged? Could there be another grand jury? It's not a trial.
But grand juries could be reconvened by the prosecutor. They can bring in another grand jury and they can move the same information forward. But that becomes the political problem. I think that it would be unreasonable to expect this Staten Island district attorney working so closely with the police officers and relying on them for his livelihood and his job to start another grand jury proceeding. I don't see that happening.
But at the federal level, Ferguson, I mean, the word on the street when I was there is it's not going to happen, civil rights charges at the federal level. But maybe is that changing?
It should change. I don't know the information, but I know that in New York that there was another asphyxiation death involving Anthony Baez almost 20 years ago. ago. And that police officer, Francis Lavoti, was indicted. He was acquitted at trial. Then the federal government came in. They indicted him on new charges, and then he was convicted. So there is a longer road that happens here, but they need to build faith that they're going to do this the right way, and then they're not going to just throw their hands up and say, sorry, we tried, because that's not good enough.
As we wrap up, today is the 45th anniversary of the police killing of Mark Clark and Fred Hampton in Chicago. When the police moved into their home, they were sleeping and killed both Black Panthers. Fred Hampton was the head of the Black Panther Party of Chicago.
Absolutely. It's hard to believe that it's been that long ago and that we're dealing with a lot of the same issues that we have here, which is, and there we had some political brothers. Here we have normal, everyday people that are unarmed, yet the dynamics are the same, is that I don't want us to be 40, 50 years from now talking back about this incident, thinking about the next incident, saying, isn't it too bad?
Vince Warren, thanks so much for being with us, Executive Director of the Center for Constitutional Rights.